I think you asked me to start with verse 21.
Yes.
The translation of this verse is, if one asks, what is the truth of many texts that say oneself seeing oneself and seeing God, that's, if one asks that, then the answer is isn't the word, the answer is isn't stated there, but it's implied there. Since oneself is one, how is oneself to see oneself? If it is not possible to see, implying if it's not possible to see oneself, how to see God? Becoming food is seeing. That is the basic meaning of the verse. Many people who have translated this verse take the first line to mean oneself seeing oneself is seeing God. But that is not the meaning here. That was already established in the previous verse, in verse 20. Bhagavan clearly explained that, but only one who sees oneself is one who sees God, because when ego is annihilated, oneself is not other than God. But what he's talking about in verse 21, that is in many texts, in many scriptures and other philosophical texts, they talk about seeing oneself and about seeing God. So what Bhagavan is asking, so anyone asks, what are the truth of this? What does it mean to see oneself, or what does it mean to see God? The answer is, firstly, since oneself is one, how is oneself to see oneself? That means we cannot see ourselves as an object. Bhagavan isn't here saying we cannot know ourselves as we actually are, but it is the nature of knowing ourselves is not one thing knowing another thing. That is, we know, as he explained in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadēśa Undiyār, being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is not two. That is, since we are one, we can know ourselves only by being ourselves, because our nature, our real nature is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that knows nothing other than itself. But as the awareness is always aware of itself as I am, so just remaining as pure awareness is knowing pure awareness. As ego, we cannot know pure awareness, because ego is that fundamental awareness I am mixed with adjuncts. Only when all the adjuncts are removed are we seeing ourselves as we actually are. But it's not a seeing like it is not a seeing of one thing seeing another thing. It is just by being ourselves, we are knowing ourselves. Just by being ourselves, we are seeing ourselves. So what he says here, since oneself is one, how is oneself to see oneself? That means you cannot see the implication is we cannot see ourselves as an object. And then he goes on to say, if it is not possible to see, that implies if it's not possible for oneself to see oneself, how to see God? If we can't even see ourselves, how can we see God? Why is that? Because since we are one, we cannot see ourselves as an object. And since God is the reality of ourselves, we also cannot see God as an object. So what is meant when it is said that we seeing ourselves or seeing God, what does that actually mean? Then he ends with a beautiful statement, Uļļadu, which literally means becoming food is seeing. What this means is, as ego, we cannot know ourselves and we cannot know God. In order to know ourselves and thereby know God, because ourself and God are one and the same thing, we need to become food to that. That is, we need to be swallowed by that. In other words, this false awareness, I am this body, that is ego, needs to dissolve back into its source. It needs to be swallowed by pure awareness. That is, only when we are swallowed by pure awareness do we remain as pure awareness. And the nature of pure awareness is always to know itself as it is. So it's only by becoming food, in other words, by this ego being eradicated, but we can see ourselves as we actually are, and thereby see God as he actually is, because God is nothing other than what we actually are. There's more I could explain on this verse, but I won't go into it in more detail at the moment, so that we can move on to other verses. The next verse is a continuation of the same idea. That is, how to become food to God. It's basically, this verse is answering, but this verse is a very beautiful verse, and the whole verse is one question, except for the last verse, the last word, which is just an imperative. But apart from that, the whole verse is one sentence, and it's all in the form of a question. What this verse means, the final verse word mati means consider, so we can add that to the question. Consider, except by turning the mind back within, completely immersing it in God, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. That is, as he said, in order to see ourselves, or in order to see God, we need to be swallowed by him, or by our real nature. So how are we to be swallowed by him? We need to immerse ourselves completely in God. So how to immerse ourselves completely in God? Since God is the light, but is always shining within the mind, giving light to the mind, we can immerse ourselves in him only by turning our mind back within and merging back into that light. So except by turning the mind back within and thereby completely immersing it in God, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. Here the word, he uses a word, but a verb can mean fathom, as in ships they fathom how deep the ocean is. It can also mean a measure, but it implies, these are all metaphorical ways of saying how to know God as he is, except by turning our mind back within and merging in him. The word that he uses here for mind is mati, and the word for God is pati. Pati literally means the Lord. So there's but pati means the Lord in a very the Lord, like in a very the beloved Lord. There's a strong sense of love implied in this word verb pati. So God is the beloved Lord who is always shining in our heart, giving light to, shining within the mind, giving light to the mind. What does he mean by giving light to the mind? The mind is a form of awareness that is firstly, there are two characteristics of mind. Mind here means the ego, the chit, the knowing portion of the mind, the perceiving element in the mind, the subject, rather than the object. All other thoughts are objects. Ego is the subject. So here mind means ego. But as ego or mind, we know so many other things. The two characteristics of ego are, firstly, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. And secondly, we are always aware of other things. That is, so these were two defining characteristics of ego. As ego, we're aware of ourselves as a body, and we're consequently aware of other things. So how are we aware of these things? Ego, as he goes on to explain more in later verses, ego has no light of its own. That is, the awareness by which we are knowing this, the light of awareness by which we are knowing all these things is not ego's. This light doesn't belong to ego. Ego borrows this light from its source, which is the fundamental awareness I am. So what he refers to here as the Lord who shines within the mind, giving light to the mind, is that fundamental awareness I am. ego is borrowing that fundamental awareness I am and using it to know other things. But that fundamental awareness I am, when it remains as it is, that is our real nature, is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that knows nothing other than itself. But though the nature of ego is to know other things, it couldn't know other things except by borrowing its awareness from the pure awareness, which just is as it is and never knows anything other than itself. So that's what he means by God or the Lord shines within the mind, giving light to the mind. So so long as the mind, we are turning our attention outwards, we are using that borrowed light to know things other than ourselves. If we turn our mind, our attention back within to face the original light, the light of pure awareness, that is the fundamental awareness I am, that is like if you've got a mirror and you can use that mirror to reflect light to see objects in the dark. That if you've got a dark corner and you take a mirror and hold it in the sunlight, you can shine it into a dark corner and you can see objects. The mind is like that. The mind is using the light it borrows from the sun of pure awareness to know objects. If that mirror is turned round to face the sun, the mirror is the mind. Is the mind then knowing the sun by its reflected light? No, the reflected light, when we turn it back to face the sun, that reflected light merges back into the sunlight. It's lost in the sunlight. And we don't need the light of the mind to know ourselves, because what we actually are, our real nature, pure awareness, is Swayam Prakasha, it's self-shining. It shines by its own light, whereas mind shines by the light borrowed from pure awareness. Pure awareness is shining by its own light. That's why often pure awareness is an analogy that is often used for pure awareness is the sun, and an analogy that is often used for the mind is moon. Just like the moon has no light of its own, but what we call the moonlight is just the light of the sun that the moon is reflecting towards the earth, that we call moonlight. It's the light doesn't belong to the moon, but it seems to be coming from the moon. Likewise, the light of awareness doesn't belong to the mind, but the mind uses that light of awareness to know other things. That mind needs to be turned back so the reflected light merges back into the original light. That's like in a solar eclipse, well, from the moon's point of view, the moon is facing back at the sun. So the moon is reflecting the light of the sun back towards the sun. It's not thereby illumining the sun. The reflected light merges back into the original light. So that's what's meant here by immersing the mind in the Lord, who shines within the mind. So what Bhagavan refers to here lovingly by this word pati, beloved Lord, is that pure awareness that is always shining in our heart as I am. So in order to know that pure awareness as it is, in order to fathom it, we need to turn back within and thereby immerse ourselves completely in him. That is, the reflected light of the mind needs to be immersed in its source, in the pure light, in the original light from which it arose. Here, in this verse, this is Bhagavan is asking here a rhetorical question. Except by turning the mind back within and completely immerse it in God, who shines within the mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. This clearly implies that is a rhetorical question. The implication is that it is not possible. Except by turning the mind back within, there is no way we can know God, or we can know the source from which we originated. We can know what we actually are. So this is one of the places where Bhagavan very, very clearly implies whatever other paths we may follow, eventually we have to come to this path of self-investigation, of turning our attention back within to face our own source, which is what we actually are. So this is Bhagavan is very strongly emphasizing here that the only way for us to know what we actually are, or what God actually is to turn our mind back within and thereby completely immerse it in God, thereby be swallowed by God. So here he's talking about how can the mind know God? So what is this mind? That is the subject he takes up in the next verse. And here, as I say, in this context, mind is synonymous with ego, as he makes very clear in the next few verses. What he says in verse 23 is, he begins by saying, the body does not say I. Here, he's using the word say in a metaphorical sense. Obviously, I mean, if you take it literally, yes, the body is saying I, the body is constantly saying I. But what he means here by body does not say I is the body is not aware of itself as I. And in the Kaliveṇbā version of this verse, he added at the beginning, before this first sentence of the verse, mati Uḻḷadu. That means since it is insentient, since it is not aware, this body does not say I. In other words, the body is not aware of itself as I. Since the body is not aware of itself as I, Bhagavan is here beginning to analyze what is ego, what is mind. It is not, the ego is not this body, because the body is not aware of itself as I. Another reason why ego is not, so the body does not say I. And then the next sentence he says, no one says, in sleep I do not exist. That is, we are all clearly aware that in sleep we do exist. And though most of us think of sleep as a state of non-awareness, of unconsciousness, what we are not aware of in sleep is any phenomena, anything other than ourselves, but we are aware of our existence. Though generally people find it difficult to recognize this, but actually we are the very way we talk reveals the fact that we are aware of our existence in sleep, because after waking up from sleep, we say, I was asleep, I slept happily, I was peaceful. So if we weren't aware of our existence in sleep, how can we be aware that we slept? When we wake up from sleep, we don't need to ask others, was I asleep or not? No, we very clearly know we were asleep. Even if no one is about, we know that we were asleep. That is, we are clearly aware of what seem to be three distinct states. That is, we always take our present state to be waking. But as Bhagavan said, even in dream, we take it to be waking. But the present state always seems to be waking. And in our present state, we recognize that there are other states very similar to this state, in which we take a body as I and see a world, but we recognize those states were just dream. According to Bhagavan, this present state, any state that we take to be waking, is actually just a dream, but it seems to us these are two distinct states. That if this seems to be the real state, and dream seems to be just a mental fabrication. That's how it seems to us. But we are aware not only of these two states, we are clearly aware of a third state. That is, if supposing we were not at all aware in sleep, we would not be aware of any gap between successive states of waking and dream. That is, our whole life would seem to be an unbroken succession of alternating states of waking and dream. But we are aware, we are not always either awake or dreaming. We are clearly aware that there is a third state, a state in which we are not aware of ourselves as a body, and in which we're not aware of the world, or we're not aware of any phenomena. It seems to us to be a state in which we're not aware of anything, because we are so accustomed to taking knowledge of things other than ourselves to be awareness. We overlook the fact that our mere being as awareness, merely being in a state that is, our existence and our awareness are not two different things. In sleep, we just remain as we actually are. We are not knowing anything, but we are knowing ourselves. That is, we are knowing ourselves just by being ourselves. We are clearly aware, I am. That's why we say, I was asleep. If we weren't aware, I am, while we were asleep, how can we say afterwards, I was asleep? We are aware, but we were in a state in which we were not aware of anything else. So Bhagavan says here, no one says in sleep, I do not exist. There are, of course, philosophers, that is, philosophers will find reasons to argue anything. There are philosophers who say, no, in sleep we do not exist, because they take, if you identify yourself with the mind, which is always knowing things other than itself, true, the mind or ego is absent in sleep. But when they say, but I do not exist, but I doesn't exist in sleep, our identity doesn't exist in sleep. Our existence does exist in sleep. Since I refers to our existence, when we say I am, we're referring to our existence. Well, if you say I am, if I say I am Michael, or some other person says I am Mary, or I am John, or I am anyone, that is an expression of our identity. But when we just say I am, we're not expressing an identity, we're expressing our existence. So in sleep, we exist not as I am this or I am that, we exist just as I am. So we do exist in sleep, but not as this ego. Why Bhagavan says this, that is, what we actually are exists even in the absence of body. Body doesn't say I. Since the body doesn't say I, and since we exist in the absence of body in sleep, this body cannot be what we actually are. However, now our experience is, but we are, now our present experience is, I am this body. So what is it that rises as what is this awareness that has now risen as I am this body? Bhagavan analyzes that more in the next verse. All he says in this verse, in the third sentence, he says, after one thing, I rises, everything rises. That is very, though the body is not aware of itself as I, so the body is not I. In sleep we exist, but there's another something that rises in waking and dream, and only after that rises, everything else rises. That one thing that rises and gives rise to everything else, that is what is now aware of itself as I. That is ego, but he doesn't say it here. He clarifies that in the next verse. So in the fourth and final sentence of this verse, he says, contemplate by a subtle mind where this I rises. Here the verb he uses is en. En literally means think or consider deeply, but in this context, we can take it as contemplate, but it implies investigate. Investigate or discern or determine or ascertain by a subtle mind where this I rises. The term he uses for subtle mind is nunmati. Nun means very subtle, refined, sharp, keen, acute, precise, or keenly discerning mind, or mati means mind or intellect in this context. So with a very subtle power of discernment, we need to discern where this I rises. What does he mean when he says where this I rises? Obviously, I doesn't rise from a place, because everything rises, he says in the previous sentence, after this one thing I rises, everything else rises. So from what does this I rise? This I rise, it can rise only from ourself. That is, what exists in sleep is just ourself as the fundamental awareness I am. From this fundamental awareness I am, something rises as I. So the place where this I rises is only ourself, this fundamental awareness I am. So this is an instruction Bhagavan gives here. Contemplate or investigate by a subtle mind, or discern with a subtle mind where this I rises. Bhagavan, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu consists of 42 verses. That is 40 verses in the main text and the 2 Mangalam verses. To make it easy for people to remember while reciting, to make it easy for people to remember which verse comes after which one, Bhagavan linked all the verses together as a single verse called a Kaliveṇbā. That is the meter in which this poem is written is called Veṇbā. The standard type of Veṇbā is a 4-line verse with 4 metrical feet in the first 3 lines. And in the 4th line, it's got just 2.5 metrical feet. So it can be linked to another Veṇbā by adding another 1.5 feet. So Bhagavan linked all the verses together as a single Kaliveṇbā. That meant he added at the end of each verse, of the 4th line of each verse, an extra 1.5 feet, thereby connecting it with the next verse. So sometimes the words he added, sometimes they referred to the previous verse, sometimes they referred to the next verse. And sometimes half refers to one, half is connected to one verse, half is connected to another verse. So when he made this verse into a Kaliveṇbā, as I said earlier on, before the first sentence, he added the words mati iladal, which means since it is not aware. So the body does not say I, since it is not aware. At the end, the words he added at the end were, wait a second, I'll just get there. That is, in the original Veṇbā, it was an imperative. Investigate with a subtle mind where this I rises. When he added another 1.5 feet, he changed the meaning from an imperative, investigate. He changed it to when one investigates with a subtle mind where this I rises, naravum, it will slip off. It slips away. That is, when we investigate what this false I but rises, as I am this body, if we investigate it, if we investigate the source from which it rises, it will slip away. In other words, it will dissolve back into the source from which it arose. So this is a very important principle of Bhagavan's teachings, which he expresses again most clearly in verse 25. So that's verse 23. Then verse 24, he explained, in verse 23, he just says, after one thing I rises, everything rises, and we should therefore investigate where this I rises. But what is this I? That's what he analyzes more deeply in verse 24. This is a very, very important verse. That is, to understand what Bhagavan is talking about when he's talking about ego, what he means by ego. In this verse, he says, Jada udul nāṇ, this insentient body does not say I. Again, like as in the previous verse, when he says it does not say I, that's a metaphorical way of saying it is not aware of itself as I. Why? Because it's jada. Jada means it's not aware, it's not sentient, it has no awareness of its own. So this body isn't aware of itself as I. Sat Chit does not rise. Sat Chit means Sat is existence, Chit is awareness. Sat Chit means the pure existence, pure awareness, which are one and the same thing. Sat Chit is what we are always aware of as our fundamental awareness of our own existence. That is, I am. So Sat Chit is what is always shining within us as I am. Since that Sat Chit is always shining in all 3 states, waking, dream, and sleep, it's not something that rises, it's something that is ever existing. So in this sentence, he says, Sat Chit doesn't rise. So Sat-chit is the reality. Sat-chit alone is what is real. So the body isn't aware of itself as I, and the sat-chit doesn't rise. But he goes on to say, in between, that's in between the sat-chit and the body, one thing, I, rises as the extent of a body. So this is the same term he used in the previous verse for one thing, I, is Nāṇ. He uses it here also. He says here, it rises in between and as the extent of a body. What does he mean by saying it rises in between? Are sat-chit and the body two different things with some space between them which an ego can rise? No. This again is he's talking metaphorically here. That is, sat-chit alone is what actually exists. It's the substance. The body is a mere form. Just like there's no space between a bangle and the gold of which it is made, there's no space between the body and sat-chit, because nothing, that is, sat-chit is the infinite whole, nothing can be other than that. So he's using the word ideal in between here in a metaphorical sense. There are two ways, this implies two things. That is, one sense in which that is one implication of this term in between, we can understand with an example. Suppose you tell me a newspaper story you read in a newspaper and ask me if it's true. If I may say it's neither true nor false, but something somewhere in between. What does that mean when I say somewhere in between? I mean, it's not entirely true, it's not entirely false. It's got some elements of truth in it, it's got some elements of fiction in it. So it's somewhere between truth and falsehood. It's neither this nor that. In the same sense, ego, this one thing called I that rises, is neither the body, because the body is not aware of itself as I, nor is it sat-chit, because sat-chit doesn't rise, but it borrows it borrows properties of both, we can say. That is, from the body, as he says, it rises as the extent of a body. That is, when we rise as ego, we feel ourselves to be limited within the extent of a body. That is, what place do we occupy in space? Only within this body. I exist here, not out there. That's limitation in space. In time, this body was born at such and such a time, and it's going to die at such and such a time. It didn't exist before that, it won't exist after that. So we are limited in space and in time, and we're also limited as a thing. That is, once we identify ourselves as this body, then if I'm this body, then I'm not that body. I'm not this book, I'm not this table, I'm not this computer. That is, there is distinct, we limit ourselves in they say in Advaita philosophy, kala desa vastu. Kala means in time. We limit ourselves in time by identifying ourselves as a body. We limit ourselves in space, because I'm here, not there. And we limit ourselves, vastu here means thing. Because I'm this thing, I'm not any other thing. So, but each thing, each form is distinct from each other form. So we are limiting ourselves to the form of this body. So, so as ego, we take on the properties of the body. But before we take on the properties of body, we first must take on the properties of sat-chit. Except sat-chit doesn't actually have any properties. That is, there are no existence and awareness have no properties. That is, they are, sat-chit is the fundamental substance. Whereas the body is a form and has all sorts of properties, sat-chit is the formless substance. It has no, it is niguna, it has no qualities or properties. But just like ego borrows the form of the body, it takes the form of a body, where does ego get its substance from? It gets its substance from sat-chit. Substance here means existence and awareness of a substance. That is, if we as ego, we seem to exist and we seem to be aware. if we didn't have this existence and awareness, we couldn't take a body to be I. So we first have to borrow from Sat-Chit our existence and awareness, in other words, our substance, and we borrow from the body all our limitations. So this is what Bhagavan means here, but one thing I rises as the extent of a body. One thing I implies one thing called I, but there's no word there for called, but it implies one thing called I. So this one thing called I, it is neither, it's aware of itself as I, so it's not the body, because the body is not aware of itself as I. And it rises, so it's not Sat-Chit, because Sat-Chit doesn't rise. Sat-Chit is ever existing. Something that rises is something that exists at one time and doesn't exist at another time. But Sat-Chit is always existing. So it neither rises nor subsides. It neither comes into existence nor ceases to exist. So, but this one thing called I, but rises in between, it rises. That means it comes into existence and it also ceases to exist. Every morning when we wake up, or when we begin to dream any dream, we rise as ego. When we become too tired of constantly projecting a world, whether in dream or in this present state, we subside back into sleep. So this ego is a rising and subsiding, and appearing and disappearing I. So it's not the real I. It borrows its existence and its awareness from Sat-Chit, and it borrows the form from the body. So it borrows substance from Sat-Chit, it borrows form from body. So then Bhagavan, after saying this, then Bhagavan says, what is this one thing called I? He gives a list of terms in the next sentence. He says, this is Chit Jada Granti. Chit Jada Granti means Chit is awareness, Jada is what is not aware, and Granti means not. So it's the not binding together awareness and what is insentient. That doesn't mean that the Sat-Chit is bound. It's not actually bound, but that is, ego is a confused mixture of Sat-Chit, of existence and awareness, and of the form of the body. So the body is Jada. Sat-Chit is awareness. So the ego is neither of these two, but it is a not formed by the mixture of these two. It binds these two together. Oh, before I go on, sorry, there was one more thing. I was talking about the word ideal in between. I was saying it had two meanings. That is, one meaning is ego is neither this nor that, but borrows the properties of both. The other significance of this term ideal in between is it is ego alone, but so to speak, is the link between Sat-Chit and this body and consequently the world. That is, all phenomena, starting with this body and all the phenomena of this world, and all that is, the world includes both the physical phenomena of the external world and the mental phenomena of the internal world. That is, we live in two worlds simultaneously. We seem to live in an external world of material, of physical things, and we also live in an internal world of mental things, of thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, and so on. It seems we're in two worlds, but actually, according to Bhagavan, the external world is nothing but perception. So actually what seems to be an external world is nothing but a part of this internal world. But it seems to us now that we're inhabiting two worlds. There's the external world that we share with everyone else, and there's an internal world in which we exist all by ourselves, in our own private little world of our thoughts and feelings and so on. So this external world and internal world, they're all phenomena. They're things known by us as ego. The only connection between this world and Sat-Chit is ego. Ego is that is, when Bhagavan says it's in between, it is the, so to speak, the mediator. That is, in Advaita texts, it's often said, the whole world is Brahman. In what sense is the whole world Brahman? According to Bhagavan, in what Bhagavan says in verse 26, which we'll be coming to shortly, Bhagavan says everything is ego. So whereas the Upanishads say everything is Brahman, Bhagavan says everything is ego. Is there a contradiction? No, because in what sense is everything Brahman? Everything everything, all phenomena arise only from ego. Ego arises from Sat-Chit. So there's no direct connection between Sat-Chit and the phenomena. The mediator, that is, first we rise as I am this, as ego, and then we project all these phenomena. So the link between phenomena and the reality, Sat-Chit, is ego. Ego partakes of the properties of both. It seems to be a phenomenon because we identify ourselves with a phenomenon. We experience this body and mind, this bundle of 5 sheaths, as ourself. That's an important thing to also I should have mentioned. When Bhagavan talks about body, when he talks about as he clarified in verse 5, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. So Bhagavan isn't just talking about this physical form, he's talking about all the 5 sheaths. The 5 sheaths, why does Bhagavan say the body is a form of 5 sheaths? Obviously, a dead body isn't a form of 5 sheaths, but the body we experience as I, whenever we experience a body as I, we never experience a dead body as I. It's always a living body. So there's the physical form and there's also life. We also don't experience a sleeping body as I. It's always a body that seems to be awake. So when it's awake, there's the mind, the intellect, and the will are functioning in it. So these 5, body, life, mind, intellect, and will, are what are called the 5 sheaths. So though these are 5 distinct things, we can distinguish one from the other, we experience them collectively as I. So we will say in one sentence, I am sitting, I am talking, and I'm thinking. These are actions of the body and actions of the mind. We take them all as I, because we take the whole bundle, the body, mind, the whole bundle we take as I. Yeah. So as I was saying about this term in between, ego is the only connection, but all this phenomena, including this body and mind and the whole bundle of 5 sheaths and all the external phenomena, the only connection these phenomena have with Sat-Chit is through ego. That is, it's only in the view of ego that all these things seem to exist. So just like ego borrows its existence and its awareness from Sat-Chit, in turn, it imparts its borrowed existence to other things. That is, other things seem to exist only in the view of ego. So they borrow their existence, this world and all phenomena borrow their existence from ego. And ego borrows its existence from Sat-Chit. So what actually exists is only Sat-Chit. Ego doesn't, there's a very nice principle that Bhagavan often used to say, and it's also said in Bhagavad Gita and other places. Bhagavan often used to say, that which exists at sometimes, but not at other times, that which doesn't always exist, doesn't exist even when it seems to exist. That which actually exists must always exist. If it doesn't always exist, it doesn't. It's not a real existence. It's only a borrowed existence. So ego doesn't actually exist, but it borrows its existence from Sat-Chit. This world doesn't actually exist, but it borrows its existence from ego. That is, only in the view of ego that the world and phenomena seem to exist. And ego has no existence of its own. It borrows its existence from Sat-Chit. So that's another sense in which Bhagavan uses this term ideal, in between. As I say, in the next sentence, he begins by saying that this one thing called I but rises is Chit-Jada Granti. We can understand this more clearly. It's the knot, it's the link between what is real, which is Chit, awareness, and all these phenomena which are Jada. And ego is, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. I am this body is a mixed awareness. In that mixed awareness, what is real is I am. That is the chit portion. I am is expressing our awareness of our existence and our awareness. The body is a jada portion, is the non-aware portion. So in this mixed awareness, I am this body, is chit jada granti. That is, it's a binding together of what is real, I am, with what is not real, namely this body. And consequently, all other things, all other insentient, all other phenomena, which are all insentient. Though this ego is called chit jada granti, this doesn't mean that consciousness is in any way bound. It is not consciousness, it is self that is bound. It is only in the view of ego that is this false I that rises, borrows the awareness from Sat-Chit, and it experiences itself as a jada body, as an insentient body. So ego is this chit jada granti. So this I that rises is what is called chit jada granti, but not between consciousness and awareness. They're not, that binds the two together as if they are one. The chit itself is ever untouched by this. In the view of chit, there is only chit. There's nothing else. So it's not at all affected. It's only in the view of ego this bondage seems to exist. So since it's a knot that binds chit and jada together, it's also what is called bondage. So the next word Bhagavan says is bandham. Bandham means bondage. So these, as I say, these are a series of terms describing this one thing called I that rises as the extent of a body. In other words, this false awareness, I am this body. So it is chit jada granti, it is bondage, bandham. It is jivan, the jiva, the soul, or the sentient being. It is nupame, it is the subtle body. Here, Bhagavan is using the term subtle body here in a very different sense to the sense in which it's generally used in Advaita Sastras. So if we shouldn't confuse what Bhagavan's talking here, the sense in which he uses the term subtle body here with the sense in which it's used in Vedanta Sastras. I won't go into it more, but there's more I could explain about this subtle body, but I don't think we've got time now. It is ahande. Ahande means ego. Ahande is a Tamil term that derives from the Sanskrit ahanta. Ahanta literally means I-ness. So that's the term that Bhagavan generally used to refer to ego. Sometimes he referred to it as ahankara, but more commonly he just used the term ahande, the I-ness. It refers to ego, this separate, one thing called I that rises as the extent of a body. And it is also icchamsaram, it is this samsara. Samsara is a word that means wandering, revolving, perpetual movement, restless activity. That is, it's sometimes explained, this may not be the strict etymology of the term, but it's sometimes explained that samsara is samchara. Chara means moving. Sam means what is very thoroughly moving. So it conveys the sense of wandering, revolving, perpetual movement, restless activity, worldly existence, and the basic, I mean, the most widely understood meaning of samsara, it's the cycle of births and death. That is, this a perpetual cycle of taking birth and dying and taking birth and dying. In other words, an endless stream of an endless series of dreams. Because according to Bhagavan, every life is just a dream. So this ego itself is samsara. There's no samsara other than ego. So ego is bondage, it's samsara, it's a subtle body. And he finally says, manam, it is the mind. So ego, that is this one thing called I, is what is variously referred to by all these names. But the fundamental name that Bhagavan uses to refer to this one thing called I is either ego, ahande, or the thought called I. Bhagavan often referred to it as the thought called I, because why is it a thought? Though unlike all other thoughts, it's endowed with awareness, it cannot stand without it always identifies itself with the body. The body is just a thought. So as a mixture of the light of awareness and a thought, it is a thought in that sense. And of all thoughts, it is the first thought. Bhagavan often used to stress that. Only after ego comes into existence, all other thoughts, all other phenomena come into existence. And then we come on to verse 25. Verse 25 is perhaps the most important verse in the whole of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. We could even say it's the most important verse of the whole of Bhagavan's teachings, because here he really reveals what is the nature of ego. And what he reveals here about the nature of ego, he revealed this in so many other places, but particularly he's expressed it very beautifully in this verse. But as far as I'm aware, no one before Bhagavan had explained this so clearly. That is, in this verse, the subject of the verse is in the final line. He says, Uruvatra Peyahande. Uruvatra means formless. Pey means a ghost or a phantom. Ahande means ego. So what he's talking about in this verse is a formless phantom, is the formless phantom ego. Why does he call the ego a formless phantom? It is formless because it has no form of its own. That is, though it rises, taking a body to be itself, it is not that body. But the body is jada. The body is not aware of anything. It is not aware of itself as I, or aware of anything else. So it has no form of its own, so it's formless. And he also calls it a phantom. Why does he call it a phantom? Because it has no substance of its own. As he said, as he implied in the previous verse, it borrows its substance, its existence and its awareness from Sat Chit. So it's got no substance of its own and it's got no form of its own. So it doesn't actually exist. But though it's a formless phantom, it creates so much trouble. All this world is created only by this, because only after this one thing called I, in other words, ego, rises, everything else comes into existence. So though it is just a formless phantom, it has neither form nor substance, it has no real existence at all, but it brings everything else into existence, so to speak, as he explains in the next verse. So, as I say, the subject of this verse is this formless phantom ego. But he says that right at the end of the verse. He begins the verse by saying simply, Urupatri Undam, grasping form, it rises. Urupatri Nikum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri Undu Mika Ongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu Urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. That means leaving one form, it grasps another form. It's always constantly grasping form. Tedinal otum pidicum, if sought, it takes flight. Uruvatra Peyahande, this formless phantom ego, or know this. So what does he mean here? Why does he say coming into existence, that is grasping form, it comes into existence? Very loosely we could translate this as by coming into existence, by grasping form, it comes into existence. But Bhagavan actually doesn't say that. He doesn't say by grasping. He's not explaining here how or why ego comes into existence. He's explaining the nature of ego. That is, as soon as ego rises, it grasps a form. So, and it stands grasping form. And grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes. And if it leaves one form, it grasps another form. So grasping form is the very nature of ego. So what does Bhagavan mean by grasping form? Since ego is a formless phantom, any form that it grasps is something other than itself. So what this implies is ego is constantly grasping things other than itself. What is the first form it grasps? The first form it grasps is the form of a body. That's the form of 5 sheaths that is called body. So it grasps this And then having grasped the body as I, so long as it stands, it continues grasping this body as I. And it also grasps other forms, and thereby it feeds itself and flourishes, and flourishes abundantly. So how does this formless phantom ego grasp forms? What he means by grasping forms, it grasps in its awareness. In other words, it's by attending to or being aware of other things that we are grasping them. So grasping also means we're attaching ourselves to these things. So we first attach ourselves to this body, and we take this body to be I. And then through the five senses of this body, we project and perceive a world. And we experience so many other thoughts within the mind and so on. So all this, all the outward going activity of the mind, all phenomena are forms. So that is not only the physical phenomena, but also the mental phenomena, the thoughts, the feelings, the mental chatter, the memories, the perceptions, everything, even our desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, these are all forms. What is a form? A form is anything that can be distinguished from any other thing. So anything that has a separate existence is a form. So, but as ego, we're constantly grasping form. Does this mean that there's a body existing and ego comes into existence and it once grasps a body? No, but none of these forms exist independent of ego. So as soon as we rise as ego, we project the form of a body, or the form of five sheaths called body, take that to be I, and consequently we experience so many other forms. As he says in verse 4, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? That has a direct connection with this verse. That is, here Bhagavan is saying the nature of ego is to grasp form. The first form, first it grasps a form as itself. So that's what he means in verse 4 when he says, if oneself is a form. That is, if we rise as ego and thereby grasp the form of a body as I, we thereby see all the other forms that constitute the world and God. If we don't rise as ego, if we don't experience ourselves as a form, who can see their forms and how? So it's only when we experience ourselves as a form, but we experience other forms. So the very nature of ego is constantly grasping forms. So attending to anything other than ourselves, being aware of anything other than ourselves, is grasping form. So this is the very nature of ego. This is the food on which ego survives. That ego cannot come into existence without grasping form. It cannot stand without grasping form. And it cannot feed itself and flourish without grasping form. So as soon as it leaves one form, it grasps another form. So such is the nature of ego. But then the most important sentence in this verse is Tedinal otum pidicum. That literally means if sought, it takes flight. What does he mean by if sought? Who is to seek it? Obviously, it is ego that is to seek itself. If ego turns its attention, now the nature of ego is to attend to things other than itself. It's constantly attending to forms, to phenomena. If instead of attending to anything else, if ego tries to attend only to itself, in other words, if it seeks to know, who am I, what am I, if it seeks to know itself, instead of grasping other things, if it tries to grasp itself, otum pidicum literally means it will take flight. It will run away. So why will it run away? Because ego, we seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves. If we turn our attention back to ourselves to see what we actually are, to the extent that we attend to ourselves, we are thereby letting go of other things. And without holding other things, ego cannot stand. So when we try to hold ourselves, we are just a formless phantom. So when ego tries to grasp itself, it subsides and dissolves back into its source. This is the great, this is the very heart of Bhagavan's teaching. This is the great revelation. This is the one thing that Bhagavan has revealed that has never been revealed so clearly anywhere before. That is the nature of ego is to come into existence, stand and thrive by attending to things other than itself. I'm not saying that that's a cause of its coming into existence, but the nature of its coming into existence, of its standing and its flourishing, is grasping other things. It's only by grasping other things that ego can stand and survive. If ego tries to grasp, instead of grasping other things, if it tries to grasp itself, it will subside and dissolve back into its source. It will take flight. So this is the very heart of Bhagavan's teachings. If we understand this principle, this is the key to understanding all of Bhagavan's teachings. That is, so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. Whereas if we try to attend to ourselves, ego will thereby be dissolved. So how can we surrender ourselves? How can we surrender ego? Only by investigating it, only by turning our attention back towards ourselves. That's why he says in the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, who am I, he says, being firmly established as Atmanishta Param. That means being Atmanishta Param. That means being one who is firmly established as oneself, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana means thought of oneself. In other words, it implies self-attentiveness. So being the implication is being so keenly self-attentive, but we give no room to the rising of any other thoughts. In other words, we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we are not aware of anything else. That is giving ourselves to God. Because when we attend to ourselves keenly, ego dissolves and merges back in its source. So that is surrender of ourselves back to God, the source from which we rose. So this is the very key to Bhagavan, to understand what Bhagavan means by self-investigation and self-surrender. This verse is the key. As I say, Bhagavan said this in so many other ways, in so many other places, but in this verse, he packed it all, and in this verse alone is sufficient to understand the whole of Bhagavan's teachings. If we understand this, what he reveals in this verse, we've understood everything. So here he says, ego comes into existence grasping form. This could be, if we take this out of context, we could take it to mean that there are forms out there and ego comes into existence and grasps them. But such is not the case, as he makes clear in the next verse. What he says in the next verse is verse 26. Ahande undayan amatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahandeye yavamam. Ego itself is everything. That is, why does he say this? All other things seem to exist only in the view of ego. That all other things mean, everything here means all phenomena, all forms, all everything other than the pure awareness I am, which alone is real. So only when ego comes into existence, or everything else comes into existence. He also said this in verse 23, after one thing I rises, everything rises. So this is another very, very important principle of Bhagavan's teaching. Everything else seems to exist only in the view of ego. So when ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists. That nothing else means no phenomena, no objects, no forms, nothing other than the fundamental awareness I am. So since everything else exists only in the view of ego, and another thing, it is the nature of ego to grasp form. So ego, first it grasps a form as I, that it first takes a body as I, and consequently it knows other forms. That is, as he said in verse 4, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So all other forms come into existence and appear only when we experience ourselves as a form. When we raise as ego and project and take a body as I, we consequently project all other forms. So all other forms, that is, it is the nature of ego to be aware of things other than itself. When it's not aware of anything other than itself, it dissolves and merges back into its source. So the very nature of ego is to be aware of other things. Since other things don't exist independent of our awareness of them, everything is only ego. Ultimately, all comes back to ego. Ego is in the Kaliveṇbā version of this verse, he adds an adjective to before the first sentence. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. The first word is ego. Before that, he adds a relative or adjectival clause, karuvam. Karuvam means which is the seed, or which is the embryo, or it can mean embryo, it can mean womb, it can mean efficient cause, or the inner substance, or the foundation. So that is the seed from which everything else sprouts. So, all phenomena, they exist only in the view of ego, and it is the very nature of ego to be aware of phenomena, to be aware of things other than itself, to grasp form, in other words. So all forms are nothing but ego. That is, ego is the source, the seed that sprouts as all these things. And these things, in substance, these things have no existence independent of ego. So all that they actually are, they all reduce back to ego. So ego itself is everything. If you remove ego, you remove everything. When ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. So this is also, this verse is a very, very important verse. This is also explaining some fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teachings. So how does he conclude this verse? After saying, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Then what is his conclusion? Therefore, know that investigating what this is alone is giving up everything. What this is means what this ego is. If we investigate this false I that rises as I am, this body, and consequently sees all these other things, if we investigate what this I is, that is giving up everything. Why is it giving up everything? Because as he said in the previous verse, Tedinal autum pidicum, it's sought, it takes flight. If we investigate what this ego is, it thereby takes flight, that it subsides and dissolves back into its source. And in the absence of ego, everything else is that if ego does not exist, everything does not exist, as he says in the second sentence of this verse. So investigating the ego, investigating what this ego is, investigating who am I, is giving up everything. This is why Bhagavan has said that but knowing ourselves, there's nothing easier, and of all paths, this is the easiest path. He says very clearly in Āṉma-Viddai, that's the song on the science of self, 5 verses, for which Murugan composed the refrain. Ayayati sulapam. It's so very easy. Āṉma-Viddai, ayayati sulapam. It's so very easy. Atma-Vidya, that is the science of self, or knowing oneself, is so very easy. Bhagavan then, after Murugan composed the refrain and the sub-refrain, Bhagavan then composed the verses, and I think it's the 3rd verse, he says, 3rd or 4th verse, 4th verse, he says, to remove the bonds of karma and to bring about the destruction of birth, it's literally for the destruction of birth to arise. Of all paths, this path is extremely easy, implying this is the easiest. So, according to Bhagavan, investigating ourselves and knowing what we actually are is extremely easy. But in our experience, it seems to be extremely difficult. Does that mean Bhagavan is wrong? No, Bhagavan is right. It is extremely easy. But why does it seem difficult to us? Because we are not yet willing to give up everything. Because investigating what this ego is entails giving up everything. And until we are willing to we are very happy to let go of everything every night when we fall asleep, because we know very well next morning we're going to pop up again and everything is going to be as it was. So we're not worried about going to sleep. But if we're asked to go to sleep eternally, to remain in a state of eternal sleep, no, we don't want that. We're not ready to let go of everything. Our desires and attachments, our likes and dislikes are still too strong. And the seed form of these likes and dislikes, the desires and attachments, are what Bhagavan called Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas means the inclination towards Vishayas. So we have so much inclination to experience things other than ourselves, we are not yet willing to let go. Because we're not yet willing to let go, even though we try to be self-attentive, we are only being partially self-attentive. We're not entirely letting go of everything else. So we're not turning the full 180 degrees. We may be turning 20 degrees, 50 degrees, 90 degrees or something. But we are not yet, because we're not yet willing to let go of everything else. Only when we are willing to let go of everything, in other words, when we're willing to surrender ourselves completely, will we be able to turn the full 180 degrees? And as soon as we turn the full 180 degrees, ego will thereby be eradicated. So what makes self-investigation seem difficult is our unwillingness to let go of everything. And so how do we cultivate the willingness to let go of everything? Only by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. That is, every time we try to turn our attention within, we are thereby weakening the inclination to go outwards. The inclination to go outwards is what is called Vishaya Vasana, and we are strengthening the inclination or love to go within. That is what is called Satvasana. Vishaya Vasana means inclination towards Vishayas, towards phenomena or forms or things other than ourselves. Satvasana, Sat means being or existence. So that inclination just to know and to be what we actually are, that is called Satvasana. So by our practice of self-investigation, we are slowly strengthening our Satvasana and weakening our Vishaya Vasanas. And this is how we will eventually reach a point where we will be willing to let go of everything. And then we will find, yes, Bhagavan was right all along. There's nothing easier than knowing oneself. We could know ourselves here and now if we really wanted to. Bhagavan once said, everyone who comes here says they're coming only for moksha. If I show a small sample of moksha, all the crows will fly away and I'll be left sitting here alone. That means, though we all think we want moksha, we are none of us yet ready to pay the price for it. Because in order to experience moksha, in order to be liberated from all these things, we need to let go of them. We want to have our cake and eat it. We want to be free of all the troubles caused by phenomena, but we still want to hold on to them. You can't have it both ways. If we want to be free of all troubles, we need to let go of them. If we cannot complain that this world is causing us problems when we are the one who are clinging to this world. We're clinging to this body as I, and consequently clinging to so many things in this world. My family, my possessions, my identity, my social status, my wealth, my this, my that, my country, my community, my political party, my whatever it is, my religion. All these are identifications and attachments. So long as we're attached to anything, so long as we identify ourselves with anything, we are not yet willing to let go. So that is why this path, though there's nothing easier than knowing ourselves, it takes a lot of hard work that we need to patiently and persistently practice this path of self-investigation and self-investigation and self-surrender in order to weaken our Vishaya Vasanas and strengthen our Satvasana. Then only we will be willing to surrender ourselves completely. When we're willing to surrender ourselves completely, there is nothing easier than that. I would like to continue, but I think maybe I've taken up a lot of time, so I don't know what you feel. Would you like me to do a few more verses, or shall I, or shall I begin to answer the questions now?
I think, Michael, it would be great if we spend the next half hour opening it up to the satsang members. We can start with the questions, and if we have time, then others can
Okay,
There's been some
that's
questions.
what I thought. Sorry, I've talked for a long time, but these are such important verses.
Yes,
and
indeed.
this is the verses, particularly this 24, 25, 26. This is the very heart of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. If we grasp what Bhagavan is saying in these verses, we grasp the fundamental principles of his teaching. Everything else will fall in place. Everything else will be seen in perspective.
Yes, and we will be studying that in more detail, hopefully in the next few satsangs. So thank you so much for that.
Right.
I think we had a question.
There
Ted,
were
did you
two
want to say
questions already.
Okay.
Jody and Marty both had questions. So
But Michael, if you may, I'd like to ask a real quick question based on what you just spent the last 10 minutes talking about specifically, if it's okay. And you can be brief with this.
Yes.
Am I to believe, as I know I am, and I've heard this many times, but the hook is going deeper and deeper into my awareness about it, that only by the practice of self-inquiry can I expect to keep the ego at bay and find self-awareness? Isn't that a terribly steep price to pay for somebody who's lived 70 years and never practiced that before? Isn't this, particularly speaking, virtually impossible to do, or almost impossible to do, to keep self-inquiry ever present in my consciousness?
Whether we are 7 months or 70 years doesn't matter. You are not just 70 years. You're far, far older than that. You are very, very ancient. We've been here a very long time. We've been this present life is just a dream. One of a long, long series of countless dreams have been going on. So throughout all our dreams, we've been on a spiritual journey. Even when we were thoroughly worldly, we were still on a spiritual journey. Even most worldly people are on a spiritual journey, though they don't know it. They're seeking happiness outside. They have to continue seeking happiness outside until they begin to understand that happiness cannot be found outside. So even the worst sinners are on a spiritual journey. They just happen to be on an early stage of their spiritual journey. So just the fact that your body is 70 years old is neither here nor there. We don't know how far we are advanced along this journey. That is, we know now we've been attracted to Bhagavan's teachings. So from this, we can assume that we are getting somewhere near our destination. That's all we can assume. But how close we are or how far we are, we don't know. You may be far more spiritually developed than you give yourself credit for. You may just, it just takes 1 second to turn within and to annihilate ego. So we don't know how strong, how strong are our Vishaya vasanas, how strong are our Sattvasana. I think most of us will agree, but our Vishaya vasanas seem to be far, far stronger than our Sattvasana. So it seems that we're still very, very far from our goal. Doesn't matter. We don't know where we are. What we know is what direction we have to travel in. The direction we have to travel in is towards ourselves, turning our attention back within. All we need to do is to travel in that direction. So long as we travel in the direction, so long as we follow without fail the path shown by Guru, we will certainly be saved. That is in the 12th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. Bhagavan said very beautifully. He said, God and Guru are in truth not different. Just as what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger will not return, in other words, will not escape, so those who have been caught in the look or glance of the Guru's grace will never be forsaken, but will surely be saved by him. So the fact we've been attracted to Bhagavan's teachings means we've been caught in the look of his grace, the glance of his grace. But he then adds an important caveat. Nevertheless, it is necessary to walk unfailingly in accordance with the path the Guru has shown. So he will certainly save us. He's given us that assurance, but we have to do our little bit. We have to try our best to follow the path that he's shown. So long as we are trying our best, that's all that it matters. It's not necessary that we succeed. If we're trying, we're doing our part. He will do the rest. So
the problem is trying my best to me means doing it every waking hour that I'm not busy doing something else.
That is what we should all be doing. But are we? No, we are not.
Right.
But we have to remember also, Bhagavan, an analogy Bhagavan often gave was of a runaway cow. A cow has wandered away from its stall and it's wandering on neighbors' pastures. So we need to bring it back to its store. The methods of yoga, Bhagavan said, are like taking a stick and running after the cow. If you try to chase the cow back into its shed, if you chase it this way, it'll run this way. If you chase it, it's going to be always evading you. Bhagavan said that's not an effective way. Instead, take a bunch of green grass and slowly, slowly cajole it back to the shed. This path of jnana and bhakti, of self-investigation and self-surrender, is like that, is like showing the bunch of green grass to the runaway cow. The runaway cow is ego. It likes to go outwards. Slowly, slowly, we have to cajole it back in. This Bhagavan knows our limitation. When you've got strong Vishaya vasanas, you cannot expect that you're going to spend all your waking and dreaming hours attending to yourself. No, but at least try a little by little by little. I don't know if you've heard the story. Sadhuam often used to give an analogy. There was about the camel's nose. Have I told this story before?
Nope.
Okay. There was a poor a poor Arab merchant who would go to city, buy some provisions and various things, and he would take them from village to village, trading them. And that's how he made his livelihood. So he had a camel who would carry his merchandise, and they would be wandering all day long in the hot desert. In the daytime, the desert is very, very hot, but at night it becomes very cold. So every night he would put a peg in the ground, he would tie the camel to the peg, and he would set up a little tent for himself, and he would get in his tent and sleep. One night it was particularly cold. And after he'd been sleeping for a few hours, he woke up and he found the camel's nose was inside the tent. And he thought, okay, poor creature, it's been wandering in the hot sun, carrying all this heavy load, and it's now very cold, so let it have its nose inside. He allowed the nose to remain. He woke up a few hours later, the whole head was inside. A few hours later, the feet were inside. By the time he woke up in the morning, the camel had occupied the whole tent and he had been pushed out of the picture. Likewise, we should at least begin with a little bit of self-attentiveness. Allow the camel's nose into the tent.
I love that story.
And that is all. We can only do what we can do. That is, we do have strong Vishaya vasanas. It is difficult for us to turn our mind back within because we are unwilling to do so. It's not actually difficult, but it's because we're not willing to do so. So slowly, gradually, like tempting a cow, when you're tempting the cow back to the shed, you have to be very patient. If halfway back to the shed, you become impatient and you take a stick, the cow's going to run away again. We have to be patient from beginning to end. We have to be gentle but persistent. We shouldn't give up our efforts. That's all that is required of us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Really, I'm very appreciative. And Jody's got her question.
I say that this applies to all of us. We're all in the same boat. You may be 70, sure. I may be 66, and some people may be 20, but we're all essentially in the same boat.
Jody?
Yes.
Okay for Jody to ask?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you, Michael, and thanks for everything today.
Yes.
That was wonderful, and it made my question seem shallow and irrelevant, but I wrote it last week after spending time with friends. And this is what I'm going to read it, if that's okay. My question is about what many of our friends on the devotional path often say, everything is perfect. Though I have never asked, the context in which they say this seems to be referring to Maya, the world of phenomena. Although I know everything's, that the Atma is perfect and self is perfect. It reminds me of when my mother used to tell me that everything happens for the best. This was very comforting to me as a child. And another teacher used to say that everything is as needs be. All of those seem to imply that something is moving the phenomenal world for our benefit. This seems to me to contradict Ramana's teaching that the seeming phenomenal world does not exist, and so therefore could not have a purpose, and there's only one being. Is there any basis in Ramana's teachings for these sayings, which almost everybody we know seems to use?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is Bhagavan taught just this. That is, yes, but the world is not real. It's just a dream. But the content of this dream, what we are experiencing in this dream, is what is called prarabdha. It's our destiny. But we all understand destiny is the fruit of our past actions. But why? That is, we have done so many actions in the past, good actions and bad actions. Why are we now experiencing these particular fruit of our past actions? That is, from a huge mountain of fruit which we are yet to experience, Bhagavan selects very carefully those fruit that will be most beneficial to our spiritual development. So as Bhagavan often used to say, whether you call it prarabdha or you call it God's will, it's the same thing, because the prarabdha that has been allotted to you has been selected by God for your good. So everything is perfect in a sense. It all depends upon a point of view. Sometimes it is said God's creation is perfect, that Ishvara Shrishti is perfect. Jiva Shrishti is the problem lies with Jiva Shrishti. That is, it's not the world that is imperfect, it's our outlook on the world that is imperfect. And this comes to the very heart of Bhagavan's teaching. But when Bhagavan says the world exists only in your view, then we can't complain about the world. We can't complain about, there are so many injustices in the world. We experience so many hardships. We've got bills to pay. I mean, there's so many types of problems we face. I mean, we all face problems of innumerable types, but all these problems, in whose view are they problems? They're only in our view, because if we don't like something, we call it a problem. So it's ultimately what makes the world pleasant or unpleasant is our likes and dislikes. If we had no likes and dislikes, we wouldn't, even if we were in the midst of a war, or even if we were dying of cancer or of a famine or whatever, it wouldn't be bad because we've got no likes or dislikes. Everything appears good or bad according to our likes and dislikes. The things we like, we call good. The things we dislike, we call bad. If you have no likes or dislikes, there's neither good nor bad. So all these are only in our view. So that is, I mean, according to Bhagavan, the world isn't created by God, but even Bhagavan would sometimes say, God's world is, what God has created is perfect. It's what you create is imperfect. That is, it's your view, our outlook that is imperfect. So, but we shouldn't complain about the world. The world is perfect as it is. Whatever is happening in our life is happening by Bhagavan's grace for our good. If we are suffering, that is our fault, because we have likes and dislikes. If we are willing to surrender, if we're willing to accept that everything that is happening according to Bhagavan's will, and whatever he wills is what is good for us. Because what is the definition of God? God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving. So since he's all-knowing, nothing can happen without his consent. Here, God and, as Bhagavan says in that 12th paragraph, God and Guru are not different. So we're talking about Bhagavan here. Bhagavan is all-knowing. He's all-powerful and he's all-loving. So since he's all-knowing, nothing can happen without his knowledge. Since he's all-powerful, nothing can happen without his consent. And since he's all-loving, whatever happens with his knowledge and with his consent is what is good for all concerned. So everything is perfect. The problem lies in us, in our outlook. The root of the problem is ego. Get rid of ego and you'll see the whole world as Brahman. So it's our outlook is wrong.
I understand that's why, yeah, there are likes and dislikes. It's just that I may not like what's happening. It may not suit my notion of what I'd like. My problem, my confusion is that it seems like when you say Bhagavan selects what's next in your Prarabdha karma for your best, in your best interest, that's back again to duality, as if Bhagavan is separate from...
That is, there are different levels of explanation, and different levels of explanation are appropriate to different levels of questions. So when we're asking about that is Bhagavan has taught the very, very deepest, but he hasn't contradicted. He often, Bhagavan would talk, for instance, if people wanted to reform the world, Bhagavan said, he who has created the world knows how to take care of it. Leave it to him. He's not contradicting his teaching, though his teaching is that the world is nothing but a mental projection. At the level at which such people are, people who want to reform the world, they take the world to be real. So it's appropriate to say to them, there's a God who has created the world. And even if we take it, this is all just a dream, it's all a mental creation, why are we experiencing this particular dream? There is some power. That power is what is called God or Guru. So does this mean Bhagavan is very busy, constantly selecting, carefully selecting with this fruit and this karma, and ordaining all these things and knowing everything that's happening and allowing? No, Bhagavan isn't doing anything. All these happen, as he said in the 14th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, all the divine functions, that is creation, sustenance, dissolution, veiling, and grace, all these happen by the mere presence of God. That is, God has no liking or sankalpa. He has got no volition. But everything that is happening by his mere presence. What does that mean? That's has a very deep significance. What is Bhagavan's nature? Because Bhagavan alone exists, and he sees what he sees is only himself. He loves himself. That self-love is his very nature. Because he alone exists, we are not other than him. So he doesn't see us as anything other than himself. So he loves us as himself. So since his nature is love, that love, and though the nature of love is just to be, not to do this or that, just to be, by the mere presence of his love, everything happens as it's meant to happen. That's what Bhagavan sometimes used to say. People sometimes used to come and say, oh, Bhagavan, I was in such and such a difficulty and I prayed to you, and then my difficulties were removed. Bhagavan said, don't blame me. There must be God doing something, not me. So, no, Bhagavan, I pray particularly to you. I don't pray to any other gods. You're the only God I pray to. And then Bhagavan said, it's all an automatic divine activity. That is, it's in his mere presence that things happen as they're meant to happen. So in what sense does he know everything? He knows the only thing, which is himself. So since he alone exists, he knows everything. Whatever appears in our view is nothing other than what he knows, which is himself. So he does know everything, but not as in the sense of knowing. I mean, our mind cannot grasp in what sense he knows everything. Is he all powerful? Yes, because there's nothing other than him, so nothing can limit there's no limit on his freedom. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't actually do anything, but all that is done happens in his mere presence. And is he all loving? Yes, certainly he is all loving, because in his view, no one is other than himself. He loves us all as himself. So we have to, in our understanding, we need to be ready to shift gear, to in certain contexts, it's appropriate to view things through a certain set of explanations. In other contexts, other sets of explanation. They may be different sets of explanation, but they are compatible. If we have an overall coherent view of Bhagavan's teaching, we will find all these different levels of explanation. They are all part of a larger whole. They all fit in perfectly. Does that help?
All of that is what I've experienced, a guru who knew everything, who demonstrated that he knew everything, that he was all loving, all wise, and all powerful. I don't doubt that. Yeah. I don't doubt that guru and every other is none other than the one being, which of course we all are. Yeah, you are that. I don't have trouble with that. What I have trouble is when we talk about something outside myself. You keep referring to he. When we talk about something, some separate being that governs this dream. Yeah. That is, he is ourself. For my benefit, as if I'm separate. That was the beginning and end of it, and still is. Okay. I am looking for the deepest explanation. Right. Okay. God is our own self. He is what we actually are. But now we are aware of ourselves. You are aware of yourself as I am Jyoti. So you have now limited yourself as this small body. So is Jyoti God? No. You are God, but not Jyoti. So long as you identify yourself with Jyoti, you have separated yourself from God. Not actually, but in effect, you've separated yourself. Of course, we can never be separate from God, but we, in our view, we seem to be something separate. We seem to be a finite little person. Born at a certain time, we're going to die at a certain time. We've set so many limitations on ourselves, thereby we have seemingly separated ourselves from God. So it's appropriate sometimes to talk of God as another, because in our view, so long as we're looking outwards, God is other than ourselves. If you want to see God as yourself, look within, then none of these questions will arise. It's only when we allow our mind to go outwards that all questions arise. Bhagavan sang Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam. If you read the verse of Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam, 5 hymns on Aruṇācala, in many verses, he's explicitly referring to the hill, to the physical form of the hill. But even in those verses where he's referring to the physical form of the hill, he's also that is the duality and non-duality are blended perfectly there. So we can't say, oh, he's talking only about the hill, because in his view, that hill is what is always shining in our heart design. So we need to have a very fluid understanding, a very subtle understanding, but we can see things from different perspectives. So Bhagavan did literally worship that mountain as God. But he saw that mountain not just as a mountain, as that ocean of Satchidananda, of infinite existence, infinite awareness, infinite happiness, infinite love. He saw that in the form of a hill. He said, if I approach you as thinking of you as a form, you stand as a hill on earth. He said very explicitly. But if we want to know Aruṇācala as it is, we need to turn within. Mm-hmm. So we need to have a fluid and flexible understanding. We need to be willing to view things from different perspectives and understand how all the different perspectives all are appropriate in different contexts.
Does that help at all?
Thank you, Michael. I guess I'm a little unwilling to reinforce duality in any way. That's what I'm trying to leave behind.
We are reinforcing duality every time we attend to anything other than ourselves. If you don't want to reinforce duality, attend only to yourself. When you allow your attention to come out to anything else, you are creating duality. You're reinforcing it. That is why our aim is to wean our mind off its outward going tendency. But we cannot deny we still have very strong outward going inclinations. So we have this inclination to create duality. So let's not be unrealistic about where we stand now. We are in this. Always the truth is non-duality. That alone is real. But in our present state, duality seems to be real. Who gives reality to the duality? We do by attending to it. By attending to anything other than ourselves, we are giving reality to duality. But it has no reality of its own. It's only the reality we give it. So if we want to be free of duality, look at yourself alone. So long as you attend to anything other than yourself, there are two things there. When you attend to yourself, there's only one thing. So if we want non-duality, we have to attend only to ourselves. But when we allow our attention to go outwards, we can't deny the seeming reality of duality. It's not real, but it seems real. We cannot deny the fact that it seems real.
Right.
We have to distinguish appearance from reality. It is not actually real, but it seems real. Just because it seems real doesn't mean it's actually real, but it does seem real. We can't pretend it does.
It's a real dream.
Yeah. I mean, when you're hungry, do you not eat food? When you're tired, do you not go to bed? Yes, it all seems very real.
I do try not to. When it's involuntary, like the doorbell rings and I go to answer it out of habit. Yeah. That's one thing, but I try not to cultivate this duality. Yeah.
Well,
when I have the choice.
Yeah,
I do attend to the self.
Yeah.
Off and on all day long.
Yeah. But we are cultivating duality every time we allow our attention to go outwards.
Okay.
If you want to deny duality, turn within.
Okay, thanks.
But we have to be realistic about we still have very strong outward going inclinations. So in that context, that's why Bhagavan, it's appropriate to worship. That's why Bhagavan set the example of worshipping a hill. That is, when our mind goes outwards, God seems to be something other than ourselves. So it's appropriate to worship God in a form. So long as we mistake ourselves to be this form, why not mistake God to be some form? If it helps to focus our mind, to focus the love, to focus the devotion, then there's no wrong.
Thanks, Michael.
Right.
We could leave it open to anybody else who may have a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
No question. Just want to say thank you so much. Everything resonated very deeply in my heart, what Michael said. And I have no words to explain because everything was just confirmation and confirmation. Thank you.
Well, it's not really anything I say. It's all, today I've just been talking about what Bhagavan has said. So, I mean, I have nothing of my own. It's all what Bhagavan said. But Bhagavan's words are so deep and so precious. And the more we go deep in the practice and thereby recognize the depth of meaning of all his writings, I mean, it's words cannot express it, how we feel about the preciousness of Bhagavan's teachings. Every word of Bhagavan's is so deep and so rich in meaning.
Yes.
And it's not just, there's whatever any verse means, but there's one aim for everything Bhagavan has written in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu or Āruṇācala Aṣṭakam or Nāṉ Ār or anything. Bhagavan has one aim and one aim alone, to turn our mind back within. That is, for Bhagavan, what is important is only practice. So everything that Bhagavan has said in any of these works, they all have deep practical import.
Well, thank you, Michael. I see it's noon now, and I think that's a perfect place to stop. Again, just re-emphasizing what this whole thing is to turn within. And so maybe on that note, we'll say thank you and welcome everybody back next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Please tell Marky, maybe next month we should start with his question, because the question he asked is a very important question. It's a very,
yes,
it's related to the very heart of Bhagavan's teaching. So I have mentally thought about that, and I had quite a lot to, in fact, that would almost be enough for a whole meeting to talk about.
I think, I think so.
It ties together so many things. So
yes.
if please ask him to keep that for next time, and we can go through that thoroughly next time.
Yes, I think we should, and give it plenty of time, because what he asked is very significant, and we don't want to shortchange that. So I think it's a good idea, maybe next week or the next time, to start with that and give it plenty of time, and then maybe allow for questions that people may have, because this is a very important point.
Because to understand that verse, we need to understand so many other verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So,
indeed.
I mean, it's true of any of the verses, but I mean, that 17, 18 are two, in a way, the most difficult verses to understand, because they're two verses in which Bhagavan seems to be contradicting his whole teachings. That his fundamental teaching is the body is not I, the world is not real. But in those two verses, he seems to say the body is I and the world is real, even for the jnani. So what does he mean there? He says it for a very deep reason. It's a very profound, what he says in those verses are very, very profound. Yes, and as you said, it can be misleading, and so many are taking it in the wrong context. If we take it superficially, it will be misleading. But it has a very, very deep meaning. Right, right. Okay. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thanks again, Michael.
Well, all thanks to Bhagavan. It's all Bhagavan's words, not my words.
Indeed.